Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do a non-spoiler review for The Will of the Many by James Islington. If you're involved in a lot of fantasy circles, chances are you have seen this book around and you've seen the impressive amount of hype and praise that it has been getting. It also has a very high average rating, and it was even one of the 2023 Goodreads Choice Award nominees. So it seems like it's well respected all around, and while it hasn't reached that mainstream level of success, it has definitely developed itself a reputation as something to really find as a staple within the fantasy genre. There's a lot of reasons why I can see this is the case. There's a lot to the themes in this story that I really loved, and there are certain unique elements to the book that I was really captivated by and excited to see what James Islington would do with those elements. I did end up actually, though, being kind of middle of the road with this one. There are those things that I really, really loved, but the way in which they were expanded on and the amount of time that we focused on those things was not as much as I would have liked, and we kind of traded some of that for screen time on things that felt pretty familiar, actually. Regardless, though, the plot was where I was really excited. I didn't really know anything going in, and when I first started the book, I was instantly hooked. I couldn't wait to find out more, and specifically to find out more about what I'm going to consider the magic system. The way it works is that you have this class system in their society. You have some people that are at the very top, and obviously all the way down to the people that are at the very bottom, as you would expect from a class system. The people at the very bottom have to endure something called a sapper, and it literally saps your will. And will is sort of this magical force that is possessed by every individual. It is spelled out in the book with a capital W. And that will can be used by people in the higher parts of their class system. And the higher up you are, the more will that you can have. And within the lower sections, you have some people that have some of their will taken from them. The people at the very bottom, though, are the ones that they are continuously drained of their will. That is not a place that you want to end up. It's essentially a form of imprisonment and slavery, you could say. You really don't have a life at that point. And this is where we meet our main character, Vis. He is not somebody who is currently experiencing a sapper. He is not having his will taken, but he is working to feed the people and clean the people. And basically he works for this prison, you could say. And it's very clear right from the start that our main character, Vis, has found a way to ever keep his will from being taken. And also, you're piecing together why that is, and it has a lot to do with where he's from, what this hierarchy, this class system has done to the people that he cared about, and you're finding out more about his storied past as you go. I don't want to say too much about his past because the reveals of it were really impactful, I found, and created some of my favorite moments in this book. But you can see that he has a vendetta to some degree. However, his principles keep him from harming people and committing acts of violence against those that he truly does not believe are culpable. The people that he doesn't feel are responsible, he does not want to risk violence coming to those people in pursuit of what he feels would be justice. Currently, he's just trying to survive and just keep himself from contributing to the system that caused his life and the people he cared about so much pain. So right from the start, I found the concept of will, the concept of the sappers, the way in which will could be imbued. I found all of that fascinating. I couldn't wait to discover more about this, but the things that we chose to focus on were not the things that I was initially intrigued by. And so in a sense, I think part of my conflicting feelings for this book come from the expectations that I had set up from the beginning of the story versus what we ended up actually getting. And what you actually end up getting this is very similar to the book Red Rising, where our main character is somebody who has a reason to dislike this class system and this hierarchy, and they end up sort of infiltrating an area that is among the most prestigious of people and the highest of classes of people. And you're seeing them among all those other people. They are training, and they're also taking information that they are learning and giving that back to some other individuals who have their own purposes and their own goals. That is very similar to the setup of Red Rising. I would say the writing style is very different. The main characters are different, And the setting is pretty similar. You don't have the will component in Red Rising, as Red Rising is sci-fi, and so there isn't really this magical aspect of it, but so much of the setup was so similar that it was, I was sad because the things that were really standing out to me as unique and I wanted to see expanded on sort of went out the window to some degree. The concept of will was something I wanted to learn more about. But in this place that our character ends up finding himself, they're not allowed to use will. They're only allowed to learn about it in the abstract because it's almost like a school setting. And so we really don't see a whole lot about will for the rest of the book. And I was like, oh, dang it, because I thought that was so cool. And there was so much moral, not ambiguity. It's pretty clear that the people at the very bottom, that's not okay. But there's a lot of questions about when your will is being taken and you give some of your will so that you can have a decent life, some of that will is then being used by the people at the very top, and those people are committing sometimes atrocities, and so are you complicit in those acts if you have given some of your will over? And that question plays such a role in the themes of the story, the justifications for the antagonist doing what they're doing, and for our main character who's somewhat caught in the middle. He really questions, well, do they have a point? The antagonists are claiming that people are allowing their will to be used, and while it's a small thing on an individual basis, when it's a collective, it causes a lot of harm. And so are those people technically to blame, even if they're not the ones doing the harmful acts themselves? And he has to question that while also having those principles that were instilled in him and that he holds very dear because of personal reasons to the people he's lost. He has to ask himself, like, where do I fall? And also, how do I make a difference? And how do I survive in this world? That's another thing too, because he really has to keep hidden his true identity. But the focus on this sort of school setting and him just trying to elevate his status within this school and us not really hearing much more about the will, I was really kind of bummed about that. I was really excited to learn more. And the pacing is interesting in that it's always moving forward, but it's not most of the time exciting or really reflective or introspective. And with those really heavy themes, I thought we would see more introspection. Also, with the plot becoming something that is relatively familiar, I was comparing it to Red Rising, but there are other plots that do this. Somebody goes on the inside to try to break the system down. That plot, because it's been done before, that if I have seen it before, then I really want it to do something different, and I want it to have something unique that stands out and sets it apart. And instead, I just found myself constantly comparing it. Not that I wanted to, but it was kind of inevitable because it is familiar ground and I have seen this before. And whether you've read Red Rising or not, or whether you even like Red Rising or not, Red Rising is very explosive and it's very action-packed and there's constantly something going on. And for some people, it's too melodramatic and sometimes they want the main character to sit back and reflect more and they don't actually like the main character, but it moves. And in this book, the pacing, I think, did take away a little bit in that we would really spend a lot of time on specifics that I don't feel at the end of the day were that important. And some of the specifics played into me being frustrated with the main character. So probably one of my biggest criticisms is that the main character is a bit of, I think the term is a Gary Stu. I always said Gary Sue, but a Mary Sue, but this is the other version, a Gary Sue. A character, if you've never heard this term, who is pretty much good at everything, that every new thing that they encounter, they end up mastering it and being the best, even when they're surrounded by people who have trained in this thing their whole lives. They are experts at this very thing. They're among the best of the best, and yet our main character can waltz in and just best everybody else. And I will say our main character has a reason to be good at a lot of things. There was a lot of education in their background, but there are specific instances where they are unaccustomed to the thing that they have to find themselves going up against, and yet they end up besting whoever they go up against. And so the pacing started to frustrate me because you would have what you could, I guess, categorize as an obstacle that would come into Vis's way. And then Vis would have a very short amount of time to train on this new thing or to prepare for whatever encounter that he was going to have to, let's say it's a duel, he'd have very little time to get accustomed to the stuff that he was going to have to use, this armor he was going to have to use, and this other person is among the best of the best, and there might even be a chance of cheating on their side. And so he doesn't know really what he's doing, but it's like really important that he gets through this thing. And I feel like as the reader, you're like, I mean, he shouldn't win. There's no reason that he should win in this thing against this person. But you know he's going to, because that's the setup that we've gotten time and time again throughout the book. Obstacle is encountered, character preps, character really quickly becomes good, character bests their enemy, move on to the next thing, and it got to the point where there was one moment where they had to go up against somebody. I won't say in what way, but I was like, how many pages until they win? Because that's kind of all it came down to in certain instances. I knew they were going to be good. I knew they were going to win. I knew they would get through with, really, at the end of the day, not a lot going against them. And I was kind of frustrated because I guess I wanted them to fail, or I wanted the obstacles to have more of a negative impact on them, or to really feel like an obstacle, really feel like a hurdle that they have to overcome, and it didn't really feel like that. Plus, our character is extremely principled. They question their principles from time to time, but their principles are very sound and understandable, and their personality, like, they don't really seem to have a lot of personality in general. Like, the whole being really good at something, I find that there are certain authors or certain stories where they lean in so hard to it that the character is somewhat arrogant, or that's the whole thing. I'm thinking of when I was a kid, the Artemis Fowl books as an example. That's Artemis Fowl's whole thing, is he's a genius and he's good at everything. He's always one step ahead of you. And you can lean into that kind of a character and do something really fun with them, but when it's sort of this understated perfection, I don't like understated perfection. I don't like characters where it feels like it doesn't matter. They're always going to be better than everybody. And there's also the element of the character, not just with the obstacles that are in their way, but the character has to try and keep hidden their true identity. And there were almost a repetitive amount of times that they would say, because it's first person narration, and they would say something like, oh, I had to think quickly, and it seemed like my quick thoughts convince them well enough, because they might slip up or they might say something they shouldn't have said, and they just immediately think of something that ends up satiating the person's curiosity about whatever mistake they just made, whatever slip up they just had. And so there was never even really a fear of him being found out, and I was just like, I need something to make me worried or concerned. And a lot of the really interesting characters, or a lot of the antagonists' arguments, were within characters you barely see, or they would pop up from time to time. And I just wish we could have had them a little bit more focused on, because there were a few characters that would show up and I'm like, I wish I was following that character. They're really interesting. I don't know what they're up to. I don't know what's going on with them. They know more than any of us, and I want to see what they're doing. And instead, we're just following this guy who's good at everything and is like I said, understated perfection. And I was like, I need you to be flawed more. I need you to be more, just more of something, more of a person, I guess you could say. Now, I do want to highlight that in part 3 at the beginning, there is a really wonderful section of the book where you're actually seeing the character have to face their demons, you could say, face the horrors of their past. It's really challenging for them, and they have some breakdown moments, and that was my favorite part of the book, which sounds really dark, but it was more of like, I finally get to see this person as a person, and it made me think that perhaps so much of what was being done with them earlier on was very intentional, by having them almost feel like a neutral entity, and then having this breakdown moment was that much more impactful, because at last you see this exterior breaking apart, and you're seeing what's on the inside. But it was sort of short-lived, and I found that once they returned back to where they were going, we kind of went right back to a lot of the things I didn't care about as much. This is going to be a very personal thing from one individual to the next, and clearly a lot of people, even if they agree with the things I'm saying, they might not feel as strongly about them, and that might be you. You might end up liking this character. You actually prefer that they don't have as many of those moments, that they aren't as flawed, or that they aren't as their emotions don't have as much of a full range or things like that. Maybe you like the neutral entity type of character, but I guess I just wanted a little bit more from them. As far as the character relationships go, I did find that the building of relationships with friends was done really well, and especially as the reader in this sort of a plot where the character has to hide who they really are, you are always kind of on edge and sad because you want them to have a real connection, but you know they can't really have that without telling somebody the truth. And you know they can't tell anybody the truth because it will jeopardize everything. And so I thought that was really well done. I do think, however, that there is a little bit of a romantic subplot. And I by no means am saying I wanted this to turn into a fantasy romance, or I wanted the romantic subplot to be this huge thing, because I didn't, and that wouldn't be fitting for this book. But I did feel that the romantic subplot was not written as well as the friendships and the friendship plot lines. So throughout this story, other characters are seeing that there is clearly an attraction between Vis and this other character, and some of them are commenting on it. The friends are kind of like, hey, when's that going to happen? But then the people that are somewhat in the know about our character and what they're doing are warning them constantly, don't trust her, don't allow yourself to get close to her. And I found I couldn't have cared less if they betrayed Vis or not, because their relationship was very off page, or it was written in kind of a recap sort of, I was going through a hard time, but this person really made me feel better about it. It's so nice to have them around. And I'm like, okay, so if they betray you, I don't care because I don't have any investment in this. I don't feel like I know that character very well. I'm not seeing a whole lot with them. But with the friends, that I cared about. If they betrayed Vis, if they had gone against him, that I was like, no. But with this character, I didn't care if that was going to happen or not. And I want to care. There are other books that do this really well. I think something like, if you've read The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, the first Mistborn book, the characters of Vin and Elend the whole time within the first book, you really question a similar situation. You have the mentor figure telling the main character, you can't trust them. You don't want to let them get close to you. They're probably playing you. And as the reader, you're like, I kind of like them. I think they seem kind of nice. That person seems kind of nice, but what if they are betraying them? I don't want them to betray them. It's going to hurt the main character, which then is going to hurt me because I care about this main character. And I didn't feel that with these individuals. And I think a lot of the end of the book is so fast-paced and there's so much that happens. And I really wish with this sort of a plot that I had an opportunity to see a little bit more of the relationship building in general. Now, tying this back to the pacing, what I was talking about with how it's a little bit slower, but there's always something moving, and the thing that took away from me was the amount of details in certain things over others. I would have liked more time on these sorts of things, and more of the intrigue, and you could say espionage to some degree, and less time on the, I'm gonna best this person, I gotta try real hard to best these people who are really experts at this thing. And it was just, I didn't care about that because I always knew what was going to happen. And these other things I didn't know. And that's what I would have liked to have been more on the edge of my seat about. The story does always move forward though. And so it's not slow in that nothing's happening. It's just the focus was not as much my cup of tea. Now I do want though to end on a positive and talk about the themes. I took a picture of a moment in the book that I feel like represented the themes really well. The question of if you are complicit, and talking about the will that I was discussing earlier. This whole portion is something said by what you could consider an antagonist, or at least somebody who goes up against Vis's principles. So they're talking about the general public, you could say. And it says, innocent, those people out there, you already had this conversation. You think that the people who give their will are somehow less responsible than the person who kills with it. The weak and poor endure in the hierarchy because the alternatives are harder, not because there are none. They know the system is wrong, but they choose not to think or speak up or act because they ultimately hope that in their silence they will gain, or at the very least not have to give more than they have already given. They are driven by myopic self-interest and greed just as much as the senators and the knights. You of all people should hate them for that. The decision may have been made by the few, but it's the will of the many that, and then I'm not going to read the last part, but basically that are responsible for the sad things in your past. That section, I was like, more of this, more of these these moral debates and these questions about the complicit nature of the general population and the will and the concept of the will. I wanted so much more of that, and maybe in the next one we'll see more of that. Maybe we'll dive into that a lot more. But that's what I meant at the beginning when I was saying that is what I was set up with. That's obviously a quote toward the end of the book. But those concepts and those questions I was given at the beginning, and I was so excited to see them dissected. And then it just felt like most of the book we were in this school being better than everybody. And I didn't want that. So for me, the reason my feelings are so conflicted and the reason that I feel kind of weirdly strongly about this is because I think if it had all around just not been that intriguing or interesting to me, then I wouldn't have felt as strongly. But these are topics I would love to see discussed more in fantasy. And I specifically would have loved, in this very instance, to have seen discussed more in this book and been able to dive into this and have it have a lot more depth and a lot more focus. And as a result of us not getting that as much, it left me oddly disappointed. However, that statement alone, if that intrigues you, you might feel that every other element of the plot and the pacing, the main character, that you actually like all those in combination with these themes. I think that is likely what has hit for a lot of people. And the comparisons to Red Rising, I think for a lot of people, Red Rising, but less explosive and a little bit slower going, actually sounds perfect for them. So if that's you, then definitely check out this book. If you are finding that the concepts sound cool, but then the potential negatives would really drive you up a wall, then this might not be the book for you. I'm kind of on the fence about whether I'm going to pick up the sequel or not. I might kind of wait and see what ends up happening. The end is really explosive and a lot of really intense, kind of weird stuff happens. So I don't really know how I'm going to feel as far as continuing on. If I get more of what I wanted from this book in the second, then I will definitely keep going. But we'll see. I am very curious if you have read The Will of the Many. What were your thoughts on this? And you can elaborate too on the specifics that I talked about. And if you haven't read it, do you think that this is something that you are going to pick up? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.